Nobody expected this name to be attached to a headline like this. Rob Reiner, a figure synonymous with Hollywood storytelling, optimism, and decades of cultural impact, was suddenly at the center of something violent, confusing, and deeply unsettling. He and his wife were found dead inside their own home, not overseas, not on a set, not in public, inside the one place people assume is safe. Police moved fast but spoke carefully. They confirmed the case was being treated as an apparent homicide, yet offered almost nothing beyond that. No suspects announced, no clear timeline released. Just enough information to confirm something terrible had happened, and not enough to explain why. That silence mattered. In cases involving public figures, details usually leak quickly. Press conferences are scheduled. Narratives form. But here, officials chose restraint. Words were measured. Updates were minimal. And every pause only made the story feel heavier. Hollywood reacted with disbelief. Tributes began appearing almost immediately, many of them written before anyone fully understood the circumstances. Friends and colleagues were celebrating a legacy while quietly trying to process an ending that didn't fit. What unsettled people most wasn't just the violence, it was the location, the intimacy of it, and the growing sense that this wasn't random. As reporters gathered and the internet began watching closely, it became clear there were details authorities weren't ready to share. And while police stayed cautious, others didn't. Behind the scenes, sources were already talking, quietly at first, then louder. And as those reports started to surface, one uncomfortable truth became harder to ignore. This story wasn't just about what happened inside that house. It was about who was closest to it. And that realization would eventually change how everything was viewed. By the time authorities arrived, it was already clear this wasn't a routine call. The home sat in one of the most exclusive and quiet parts of Los Angeles, a place known more for privacy than police tape. Neighbors would later say nothing seemed out of the ordinary. No sounds, no chaos. Just another calm day in a neighborhood where headlines rarely come knocking. Inside, first responders discovered both Rob Reiner and his wife unresponsive. Paramedics pronounced them dead at the scene. Almost immediately, LAPD homicide detectives were called in, a move that signaled something serious had taken place. But details were scarce. Police confirmed there were signs pointing to violence, yet stopped short of describing exactly what they found. They didn't specify how the couple died. They didn't announce a suspect, and they didn't say whether anyone else had been inside the home around the time of their deaths. What stood out most wasn't what law enforcement said. It was what they didn't say. No immediate danger warning to the public. No active manhunt. Just a carefully worded statement describing the situation as an apparent homicide, while stressing that the investigation was still in its early stages. That phrasing alone raised eyebrows. In cases involving high-profile figures, information usually flows fast. But this time, everything moved slowly. Even the process of securing search warrants appeared delayed, adding to the growing sense that investigators were being unusually cautious. As the hours passed, media crews gathered outside the property, hoping for clarity. Instead, they were met with silence. Reporters were forced to rely on partial confirmations and off-the-record comments, each one adding another layer of uncertainty. And that uncertainty created a vacuum, because when official information is limited, speculation has room to breathe. And before police could fully control the narrative, major outlets began publishing reports that hinted at something far more complex than a random act of violence. That's when the story took its first sharp turn. Because while authorities were urging patience, journalists were already citing unnamed sources. And those sources were telling a very different story. As police maintained their careful distance from specifics, the media landscape shifted fast. Major outlets began publishing updates that didn't quite line up with the calm tone coming from law enforcement. CNN and the Associated Press stuck closely to what police would confirm, repeating that the case was being treated as a homicide, but offering little beyond that. Then other reports dropped, People magazine published a piece citing unnamed sources familiar with the investigation, suggesting the deaths may not have been random at all. TMZ followed shortly after, claiming law enforcement sources were already focusing on a much narrower scope than the public had been led to believe. None of it was officially confirmed, but the implications were impossible to ignore. According to these reports, investigators were not actively searching for an unknown intruder. Instead, sources claimed police were looking inward, at the people closest to the couple, rather than outward for a suspect at large. That single shift changed how the entire story was viewed. If true, it meant there was likely no ongoing threat to the neighborhood. But it also meant the answers people were looking for weren't going to be simple or comfortable. LAPD responded cautiously, reiterating that the investigation was ongoing and that no arrests had been made. They avoided addressing the reports directly, which only fueled more speculation. Every non-answer became a headline of its own. Viewers watching this unfold in real time were left trying to piece together two versions of the same story. One version, careful, restrained, and procedural. The other, urgent, dramatic, and driven by unnamed insiders. And when those two narratives collide, public trust starts to fracture. People weren't just asking what happened anymore. They were asking who knew what and when. Because if investigators already had a working theory, why wasn't it being shared? And if they didn't, why were so many outlets reporting that they did? Those questions spread rapidly online, where thousands of people began dissecting every word, every headline, and every omission. And that's when the internet stepped in to do what it always does in moments like this. It filled in the gaps itself. Once the story hit social media, the pace changed instantly. What began as shock quickly turned into analysis. Clips were reposted, old interviews resurfaced, comment sections filled up with theories, timelines, and questions that had no clear answers yet. Reddit threads exploded overnight, with users breaking down every detail that had been released and every detail that hadn't. It wasn't just curiosity, it was urgency. People noticed how quickly authorities ruled out an ongoing threat. Others focused on how carefully words were chosen in official statements. Some questioned why certain outlets seemed confident while police remained non-committal. None of these points proved anything, but together, they created a sense that the public was being kept at arm's length. Rumors began circulating, and it's important to be clear here. None of this was confirmed. Posts speculated about timelines, about who may have had access to the home, about whether something had gone wrong long before that night. Others went further, pulling up old family interviews, public comments, and past creative projects, searching for meaning where there might not have been any. And that's where things crossed into uncomfortable territory. Because once a story involves a family, speculation stops being abstract. Real people are suddenly at the center of a narrative they didn't choose, one being built in real time by strangers online. Some users urged caution, reminding others that early reports are often incomplete or wrong. But those voices were quickly drowned out by louder ones convinced there was more to this story than anyone was admitting. The more police stayed silent, the more the theories multiplied. And buried within all of that noise, one recurring theme kept resurfacing. A piece of Rob Reiner's personal history that had nothing to do with crime, but everything to do with how people were trying to make sense of tragedy. It was a chapter of his life that most casual fans barely remembered. But now, suddenly, everyone was talking about it. As speculation swirled, attention quietly shifted toward Rob Reiner's past, not because of anything police confirmed, but because the internet began searching for context. Years earlier, Reiner had spoken openly in interviews about personal struggles within his family. He never framed them as scandals or secrets, but as difficult realities, the kind many families face behind closed doors. At the time, those comments barely made headlines. Now, they were being pulled back into the spotlight. One detail kept coming up. Reiner's son had previously talked publicly about battling addiction and instability, experiences that later inspired the semi-autobiographical film Being Charlie. The movie explored complicated family dynamics, blurred lines between support and frustration, and the emotional toll those struggles can take on everyone involved. None of this was new information. None of it was hidden. And none of it was evidence of anything related to what happened inside that house. But online, nuance rarely survives. As clips from old interviews circulated, some viewers began drawing connections that hadn't been made before, not based on facts, but on proximity. The idea that a tragic family history might somehow explain a tragic ending began gaining traction, even though there was no confirmation from authorities supporting that narrative. To be clear, there has been no official statement linking family history to the deaths. Police have not named a suspect, they have not suggested motive, and they have not indicated that past personal struggles played any role. Still, once a storyline takes hold online, it doesn't need confirmation to spread. For many people watching from the outside, the resurfacing of that history made the situation feel heavier, more personal, and far more uncomfortable. It shifted the tone from mystery to something closer to heartbreak. And just as that conversation was reaching its peak, another detail emerged, one that stopped speculation in its tracks and replaced it with something else entirely. Because this time, it wasn't a rumor. It was about who found them. Everything changed when the words people had been waiting for finally appeared: an arrest. According to TMZ, Rob Reiner and Michele singer Reiner's 32-year-old son, Nick Reiner, was taken into custody and is being held on $4 million bail. Online jail records show he is now in the custody of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. For the first time since this story broke, the investigation moved from silence and sourcing to action. It's critical to be precise here. An arrest is not a conviction. Authorities have not publicly confirmed a motive, and no formal trial outcome exists. But the escalation alone reframed everything that came before it. Just days earlier, reports had described a family member raising concerns with investigators, allegedly describing a relative as dangerous. At the time, those claims were framed as unverified. Now, with Nick Reiner's arrest, those early reports took on new weight. Not as proof, but as context for how the investigation unfolded. Police have remained careful with their language. Officials have confirmed that family members were interviewed and that the case is active, but they have not detailed what led to the arrest or what evidence may have been involved. What's still unclear is what exactly triggered the violence, with reports suggesting it may have followed a heated family argument, a claim that has not been officially confirmed. The public reaction shifted immediately. Shock gave way to disbelief, sympathy collided with discomfort, and the focus narrowed from what happened to how something like this could happen inside a family so closely associated with warmth, humor, and storytelling. Outside the home, the scene remained somber. Video captured friends and collaborators arriving and leaving quietly. Billy Crystal was seen with his wife, visibly emotional, as police tape surrounded the area. Tributes continued pouring in from across Hollywood. Barack Obama, Stephen King, Ben Stiller, names that underscored just how deeply Rob Reiner's work had reached. But the arrest didn't bring closure. If anything, it made the questions heavier. What evidence led to this moment? Why did it take this turn so quickly after reports of internal suspicion? And how much of what circulated online early on helped or hurt the truth coming into focus? With Nick Reiner now in custody and the investigation ongoing, one thing is certain: this case has crossed a line from rumor to reality, and whatever comes next will define how this tragedy is ultimately understood. As the investigation continued, the contrast became impossible to escape. On one side was Rob Reiner's legacy, decades of films that shaped pop culture, characters that brought people together, stories built on humor, humanity, and hope. His work lived in living rooms, classrooms, and late-night conversations. It was familiar, comforting. On the other side was an ending that felt completely disconnected from everything he represented. Violent, private, unresolved. Friends and longtime collaborators continued to gather, some visibly shaken. Billy Crystal was seen arriving at the home, the expression on his face saying more than any statement could. Hollywood mourned publicly, even as the details emerging behind the scenes grew darker. Michele Singer Reiner's role in his life was also being remembered, not just as a spouse, but as a creative partner, a photographer, and a constant presence throughout his career. Their marriage spanned more than 3 decades. Their lives were deeply intertwined, and now they were being spoken about in the same breath as police investigations and unanswered questions. That collision is what made this story so difficult for people to process, because legacies are supposed to end cleanly, with retrospectives, with celebrations, with closure. This one didn't. Instead, it left the public holding 2 opposing realities at once: admiration for a life's work and discomfort with how it all ended. And the hardest part? The truth hadn't fully emerged yet. With investigators still interviewing family members and no arrests announced, the story remained open. Not just legally, but emotionally. People weren't just waiting for updates. They were waiting for clarity, for something that would make sense of what felt senseless. And until that happens, this case sits in a space Hollywood rarely likes to acknowledge, where even the most beloved stories don't always get an ending anyone is ready for. Right now, this case sits in a place that makes people deeply uncomfortable. On one side, there are confirmed facts. Rob Reiner and Michele Singer Reiner were found dead inside their home. Police are treating the case as a homicide. Family members are being interviewed. No arrests have been made. The investigation is active. On the other side, there are reports and claims coming from unnamed sources, not official statements, suggesting a far more personal and complex situation than anyone expected. Claims about family tension, claims about who may have been involved, claims that police have not publicly confirmed. And that gap between what's confirmed and what's being reported is where the tension lives. Some people believe the media is moving too fast, filling silence with speculation before investigators finish their work. Others argue that when sources speak, the public has a right to know, even if the full picture isn't clear yet. There's no easy answer. What makes this story linger isn't just the tragedy itself. It's the collision between a celebrated legacy and an ending that refuses to make sense. A reminder that even the most familiar public figures live private lives none of us truly see.